Well, if you have a Bible, turn to one of the most quoted chapters in the Bible, 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13. It is used in weddings. It's used when you want to be romantic. It's the very definition of what love is. And in a culture today that has changed so much. I was just remembering, 45 years ago when Pat and I got married and I wanted to go into politics. And politics back then was all about policies, and the Democrats were different from the Republicans. The independents had their thing going on, but we discussed policies. And I ran for most of the offices when I was in college. I was senior class president. I got beat by this girl by, I think, 3 votes. In the junior class president, she beat me. But in senior class president, I beat her by 1 vote. So, then the bug, I caught it, politics. But it was never vicious. We didn't call each other names. We didn't wonder if they were white or black. We just discuss policies. And I think what's missing in our lives, whether it's politics or relationships or just simply living, is what 1 Corinthians 13 addresses. Now, before we jump in there, though, I got to give you why we're dealing with this subject in such a long period of time, because we're spending 3 weeks just on 1 Corinthians 13. And here's the reason. The church in Corinth, which was a port city, one of the major port cities in the Roman Empire in Paul's day, the church was just messed up, okay? You ever gone to a messed up church? Not this one, but one of those others, okay? Right? You ever gone to one? And you just knew something was wrong when you walked in? You just feel it? I've been there. I've spoken churches, paid a lot of money to go speak in churches, and when I walked in, I went, I can't speak here. I've actually turned checks back in and walked out because I couldn't. The oppression in the church was so bad. The spirit was so bad. I've done that. Not very often, but on occasions I've done that. And this church at Corinth was messed up for a lot of reasons. First of all, they were all fighting. Chapter 1, we looked at this in the beginning of the series back in January. It's taken us this long to get through this whole book. And the church was messed up in its leadership because everybody was following a different leader. Some people said, I'm for Apollos. Apollos was the gifted, eloquent speaker of the church. Other people said, I'm of Paul. He was the founder of the church. Other people said, I'm of Peter, one of the original 12 disciples. Other people said, I'm just for Jesus. The real spiritual group. And they were all fighting each other over who they were following. And Paul deals with that in 1 Corinthians 1. He says, don't be divided over leaders. And then Paul goes on to say, but you got more problems than that. Because in chapter 5, we are introduced to the fact that somebody was sleeping with their mother-in-law. Or their stepmother. And maybe their mother-in-law too, who knows? But with their stepmom. And so Paul says, even this stuff doesn't get done by the pagans. And you've got somebody in the church, and you all are applauding him for doing so. One messed up church. So they were leader messed up. They were morally messed up. And then they had this meat issue going on. They were theologically messed up. Because some people were pro-meat eaters, some people were against eating meat. You say, what was the deal with meat? We talked about this several months ago, but the deal in meat was all meat in those days was sacrificed first to an idol. The Romans had their gods, the Greeks had their gods, the Jews had their God, and they would all bring sacrifices, and only a small portion of the animal was sacrificed. The rest of it was divided between the person that was making the sacrifice for their family and the priest. And so the anti-meat people said, we can't eat this meat sold in the marketplace because it was dedicated to idols. And the pro-meat people said, it doesn't matter because God says an idol is nothing. It's just a stick. It's just wood. It's just stone. And so Paul wraps all this up and he says, guys, look, whether you eat or don't eat, it doesn't make a difference. It's how you're treating each other. And he said, you pro-meat people are being arrogant and your anti-meat people are being legalistic. He gets on both groups. Messed up church. Well, it gets even worse because they were messed up in worship. And we saw this a few weeks ago when they were they had the veil issue going on. And back in those days, women wore veils, not just in church. They wore them to indicate that they were dedicated to their husband. It was just the cultural thing to do, all right? And so women were getting free of all that and were becoming Christians, and so they'd come to church without their veils on, which was basically they were saying, we no longer are under our husband's authority, their spiritual authority. And this was really messed up May not be a big issue today. Aren't you glad, girls, ladies, that you don't have to wear veils today? But this was a big issue 2,000 years ago. And the church was getting all fried about it because the people that were not wearing veils were saying, we're free in Jesus. The people that thought you should wear veils said, you may be free, but, we got this cultural thing going on. This is just the cultural practice of the day. And not only that, some of the women were shaving their heads or wearing short hair. And that was an indication that in Corinth that you were a prostitute. And so Paul says, I don't want any of you ladies, Christian ladies, getting, getting identified as a prostitute when you're walking down the street because you got short hair. So he says, keep your hair long. Now again, it doesn't make a lot of sense to us, but back in those days, it made a lot of sense. Politics today would not make much sense 2,000 years ago, would it? See, our issues may be different, but the issue is, Paul says, as we come to 1 Corinthians 13, is this. We can have lots of information, but little implementation. We can know the Bible, but if we don't put it into practice, it has no power. We can quote verses till Jesus comes, but if we don't live those verses, it has no power. Okay? Now he comes to 1 Corinthians 13, because he says, what I want to do now is I want to go beyond appealing to your head, and I want to appeal to your heart. And so he basically summarizes everything. We're going to break this down this week and next week when he says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Paul just nails it right, like he just nails it. Now to us, man, that sounds good when we quote that in marriages and weddings and we say, love believes all things and bears all things. And, next month we can't stand each other, but boy, it sounds good during the wedding vows, doesn't it? Because we don't understand love. And there was 3 different words for love in the Greek culture that Paul was speaking to. There was eros, which is never used in the Bible, but it was a cultural term that day, which meant erotic love or sexual love. There was phileo, from which our city, Philadelphia, gets its name, the city of what? Brotherly love. Yeah, phileo, that meant friend. And so friend meant, I really care about you. And not in a sexual way, but in a friendship way. That was phileo. That was another word that was used for love. And then they had the word agape, which is a word that's used in 1 Corinthians 13, that meant self-sacrificial love. I sacrifice myself for you. You don't deserve it all the time. You may reject it. You may not understand it, but I'm doing this because I'm choosing to love you. Okay? So that brings us to 1 Corinthians 13. We looked at the first 3 verses last week. We're going to look at verse 4 and 5 today, where Paul gives us some other components of what love is all about. And just before we look at those verses, I want to just give you one more bedrock, foundational truth, and then we'll move on into those verses. Jesus is our model for what true love is, right? He's our model, our method, our means. He's everything. Because he said these words, and these are powerful words. He said in Luke and in Matthew, he said, love your enemies, pray for those that use you, do good to those that despitefully can't stand you. Now, I don't know about you, but that's tough. I don't want to love my enemies. I want to knock them to the ground. I don't want to bless people that misuse me. I want to get them back. I have the spiritual gift of revenge. I don't want to pray for the people that don't treat me right. If I do pray for them, I want to pray that hell will fall down on them or something like that. But I see that goes against my nature. But Jesus said, if you want to walk with me, in fact, he goes on, John, one of his closest disciples, says this in 1 John 4:8. He says, whoever does not love, agape, does not know God, because God is love. And if anyone says, I love God, but hates his brother, he is a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. Powerful words. Love your enemies, bless them. If you don't love like Jesus loved, you really don't know God's love. In fact, 1 John 3:14 reminds us, we know that we have passed from death to life because we love our brothers. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Those are fighting words right there. I don't like those words. I don't know about you. I had to deal with something this week that was really hard, and then I want to describe love to you. Because I got to, see, God always puts me through something when I'm going to preach on a subject like this. Love is patient, and then he does something that makes me impatient. Y'all ever have that? You ever ask God for something and he puts you through the very thing? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So got this call, and my daughter says, this was her ex-boyfriend, and who is a guy that I've bailed out of jail. I have, discipled this guy. I poured into him, and he was trying to get in my daughter's apartment with a knife, saying, he was going to kill everybody. That's a call you don't want to get. At that moment, I'm not rehearsing John 3:16. Okay? My baby is under attack. Mamas, you know what I'm talking about, right? Okay? And so my daughter, I think, probably told my wife, because my wife got the call, because they always call her, not me. And they go, but don't tell Dad, because we know what he'll do. I know people. Been around West Virginia a long time. I know people. I know people that can bury you in the West Virginia hollows. They will never find you. I'm serious. I know people that can do that. They came to my church. I led them to Jesus, but they knew how to still use a shovel. And so I found out about this the next day because they didn't want me to know. They didn't want me to come over there because I've had to go over there before. But this time he had a knife. He's trying to get in. And 11 minutes, my daughter holds the top bolt lock, trying to keep him from jamming the knife to break the lock to get into the apartment. 11 minutes, And I'm thinking, where was my friends, the state troopers, whose base is only a few minutes away? And so I say that to say this. God allowed me to go through that because I got to preach on love today. Right? Okay? Now, let me say this to you. Love doesn't mean you don't protect yourself when danger comes. Love doesn't mean you stay in an abusive relationship because you love them. Okay? There's times to get out of those kind of relationships. You understand me? Love doesn't mean you just sit there and let somebody put a knife in your chest. That's not Christianity. This is what love is. Let me give you 3 of them today, and then we'll give you the rest next week. Here's the first thing it says. Look in verse 4. Love is, say the word with me, patient. How many of you have the spiritual gift of impatience? Impatience, I said. Impatience, all right? Impatience. We don't like to wait. If there's a car in front of me that needs gas, and they go in the store without moving their car, I'm thinking very unchristian thoughts about them. I'm impatient. I'm blowing the horn. Somebody going too slow. I'm getting right on their tail to remind them their car can go faster. I'm an impatient person. But love is what? Patient. Now, let me tell you what this means. It's not talking about patient with circumstances or events. That word is, there's a different word for patience. This is talking about patience with people. People. And basically what the Greek word means is, it means you are slow to boil. I like that, don't you? Slow to boil. You may get upset, but you take some time getting there. In fact, Christendom, the early church fathers said, it's a word that is used of a person who has been wrong and has it easily in his power to avenge himself, but he chooses not to do it. Slow to boil. Now you got to remember, when Paul says this, he's writing to Greeks. Greeks had been taught by Plato and Aristotle had taught Greeks in his basic philosophy that patience is not a virtue. In fact, if somebody wrongs you, get them back. Somebody hurts you, hurt them back. Somebody does something wrong against you, you do something wrong. It was considered manly to get people back who had hurt you. So when Paul writes, love is patient, slow to boil, doesn't take advantage to get revenge, this is blowing everybody away because they can't understand. Paul, don't you understand? We've been taught all of our lives that revenge is the right thing to do, to be a man or a strong woman. But Paul comes along and he says, let me tell you what patience is. Patience is slow to boil. Why? Because God knows that relationships are the most important value in life. I remember Abraham Lincoln. He's my favorite president. You may have a different one, but if you've read the stories of his life, you know that Lincoln was a very patient individual, and he had a lot of friends, but he also made a lot of enemies. And one of the men that could not stand him was a man by the name of Stanton. Stanton absolutely despised him, hated Lincoln. He called him a low, cunning clown. He called him a gorilla. He said, you don't need to go to Africa to see the gorillas in the forest. We have a gorilla right here in Springfield, Illinois. You can come see him. That's what he said about the president, Mr. Lincoln. Hated him. When it came time, though, when the Civil War broke out and it came time to choose a war minister, guess who Lincoln selected? Stanton. And people asked him, why did you choose him? He hates your guts. He said, because he's the best man for the job. Well, they didn't agree on politics. Stanton had his views, Lincoln had his views. They clashed often, but he was a very good war minister from what history says. In that, when Lincoln sadly was assassinated and his body was now lying in a room where they had moved it to, standing over him was Stanton. He made this proclamation: here lies the greatest ruler of man history has ever known. What changed him? It was that Lincoln was slow to boil, patient, not just with circumstances or events, but patient with people. He was smart enough to know that sometimes you've got to use people you wouldn't necessarily bring into your team or that you would have around you that may drive you crazy, but patience is the ability to see the best in the person and use that for the cause that you're moving things toward, just like Lincoln did, and you choose by self-restraint to be a person that is slow to boil. I love that. I love the fact that Paul goes against culture and says, here's what I want you to understand. Patience has power to change relationships. Notice the second thing that he does. Not only is love patient, but love is, secondly, this on your outline, love is kind. Kind. The original word for kindness has the idea of an act of grace, and it means that which is useful or of service, adapted for its purpose. It means to bless someone with something that they did not expect. It also means tasty. And it was used in Paul's time to refer to food that was tasty. It'd be like walking in tonight and your spouse or your friend has got a great salad on the table and you go, oh, and you start to eat it and you go, oh, baby, the salad is very kind tonight. Now, we don't understand what that means, but in Paul's day, they would have thought that was a blessing because that word kind meant tasty. It has value. You've added value. And so the word kind, when Paul says, what is love? Love doesn't mean it's not the opposite of being unkind. Kind means that you actively choose to invest something in someone even if they don't deserve it. That's what the word kind means. I often tell people that are going through divorces, and I don't counsel much anymore because I just don't have the patience for it. But I trust them to people that do. And I often tell them that, they go through the divorce and, divide up everything and all that. And I often tell them, because they'll say, what should I do now? And I always tell them, don't start dating anybody yet because you're not ready. Number two, don't pass go, don't collect $200 when it comes to relationships because you'll get messed up. Because if you get divorced, the chances of your second spouse divorcing them goes from 50% in the first one to 78% in the second one. If you get married 3 times in divorce, it's 90% chance that your fourth spouse will be. So I'm just giving you some encouragement now. Stick with the one you got, okay? And so I'll tell these divorced couples, say, what should we do next? And I'll say, I want you to sow a treasure into their life. What does that mean? It means, men, if you're paying child support, add an extra $20 each month. Well, I ain't doing that. Well, then you're not kind. Because kind means going beyond what is expected. Or ladies, don't talk about him in a bad way in front of the kids. Be positive about him. Sure, he's a jerk. He's got terminal jerkitis. But in front of the kids, don't be negative. You with me? It means this. Writing a note and expecting nothing from it but just saying, I'm thinking of you, praying for you. I know we're not together anymore, but I hope that you have, a great week. And just blessing them. Now, the problem is because we get lawyers involved, we become adversaries when divorce is happening, don't we? We become, you're over here, you've got your lawyer, I've got mine. I paid twice as much for mine as you paid for yours, I'm going to win, blah, 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 that kind of thing. And we get divisive. But the Bible says the true measure of kindness in relationships is this. It's going beyond what is expected and sowing into that person what they did not expect. That's what it means to be kind. Love is kind. Now, let me tell you something. This means that love cannot be just a feeling, right? Well, I just fell out of love. That means you weren't in love in the first place. You don't fall out of love because love isn't a feeling. Well, they changed. Of course they did. I don't look the same as I looked when Pat and I got married 45 years ago. We change. We move our perspectives. Our lives become different. Of course we change. Of course we antagonize. Of course. What I'm trying to say to you this morning is this. When I want to be biblically loving towards another person, it means I go past my feelings and I choose to invest in you. Doesn't mean you have to be my best friend. Doesn't mean you have to change and come back to me. Doesn't mean any of that. It means I choose to invest something of value into your life. You with me? That's what kindness is. It doesn't mean you overlook the stupidity of their life. But let God handle that. But let God take care of them. You couldn't change them when you were married for 22 years. Why do you think you're going to change them after you're divorced? They get worse. Change. Somebody came to me today before the service. They said, people seemingly just change. They change restaurants, they change churches, they change spouses because we're impatient people. If people don't change as quickly as we want them to, we go somewhere else, right? And what God is saying is true love not only is patient, slow to boil, but it's kind. But let me give you the last one, because this one just kind of brings it all to a head, and then we'll look at the rest of them next week. Not only is love patient and love is kind, but love, look at the next verse, love does not envy. You say, what does the word envy mean? Shakespeare called it the green sickness. Solomon in Proverbs 14:30 called it rottenness in the bones. An old Latin proverb says it's the enemy of honor. Someone else has called it the sorrow of fools. Now, there's two things about envy I want to wrap up with. Call it jealousy for those of you that are having trouble understanding envy. Mild jealousy says, I want what you have. Sometimes people get around me and they'll come to our house and they say, I want the house that you have. Okay, stay married for 45 years, invest your money in your 20s, buy a business and run it along with your other job, have sources of passive income, don't go into debt, don't charge things on charge cards, and you can have what I have. And they give me this blank look like, what? The reason you don't have what I have is you're not doing what I do. Oh, you're not getting me. And so when they come to my house, or they see what I drive, I don't drive a Mercedes or anything like that. I just drive a hybrid. But it costs some money, but, I bought what I wanted. Not from money I made here, but money I make elsewhere. I have several streams of income. Y'all know I've taught you that. Okay? So I'm free. That's why I don't worry about this church getting paid or either, because I'm free. Okay? See, freedom is not the amount of money you have. Freedom is doing what you want. But people will get around me and they'll say, well, I want what you have. And my common response to them is this, then do what I do. My kids sometimes will go, why are you and mom spending money on that? Because we can. And you're going to get it when we kick the bucket anyway. It's all going to you. What's wrong? So I taught my kids very early, if you want what we have, your mama and I, do what we did. and in their 20s. I've told you this story before, but my daughter is on her 5th house. She's only like 31, 32, on her 5th brand new house. 5, brand new. She's made $40,000 to $100,000 on each house that she's sold. She doesn't know anything about real estate, but she's got my entrepreneurial spirit, okay? And so she runs 2 businesses. In fact, yesterday she sent me a text and said they're number one. She runs 2 offices. So sometimes her sister gets a little envious of her and says, how can she have all that stuff? She's doing 2 jobs. If you want what Kristen has, do what Kristen does. She runs 2 offices, plus she has 2 other side businesses. Okay? And so I taught her early on, invest, tithe 10% of your money, which she does. Invest your money here and save your money, save this amount of money, and buy houses and sell them and make money on them and buy another one. And she's done that. 5 houses in 10 years. I'm bragging on her. I have a right to do that because I'm the preacher, okay? But what I'm saying is, her friends get around her and are envious because they don't have what she has. But you know what they do? They party all weekend, spend $200 at Black Draft Distillery. They work 1 job at $15, $20 an hour, and then they wonder why they don't have anything. And they jump from relationship to relationship and, take these exotic vacations. That's why they don't have it. They don't save any money. They're in debt. Kristen has no school loans because I wouldn't let her do it. See, listen, folks. Envy says, I want what you have. You can have what other people have if you do what successful people do. Some of you think I'm bragging. I'm not bragging. I grew up poor. I've told you this before. I just decided I didn't want to be poor. Okay? I made a mental decision. I don't want to be poor. And so when I had my first church running 1,200 people, I had 4 jobs. 4 jobs. 3 jobs outside my church. They paid me well. I had 3 other jobs. Streams of income, streams of income, streams of income. That's why we were able to build houses and buy them and sell them and buy another one. And, blah, 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 blah. So my kids now are imitating what I'm doing. And they're becoming successful. My son and his wife are just moved into one of the highest tax brackets and they had nothing. They both grew up struggling. When my kids grew up, we were starting a church. We had nothing. We had $100 in the checking account, but we tithed every week on what we made. And we didn't go into debt, and we didn't run. And so they watched us. But they could have sat back and said, my son lives in an $800,000 house today. He's 34 years old, 35, something like that. Now, again, I'm bragging, but I want you to, it's not bragging in the bad way. I want you to understand why I'm sharing this. Because so many of you look at other people and say, I want what they have. But some of you look at other people and say, I wish they didn't have what they have. This is the bad part of envy and jealousy. I don't have it, and they don't deserve it either. That's why this crazy thinking out there that goes, we're going to redistribute wealth in America. Okay, you work as hard as I do, redistribute it. But I'm not redistributing my wealth to people that don't work as hard as I do. Amen? I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. Nobody can tell me to do it. They will have to take me to jail before I give up what I've got. I'll share it. Pat and I are big givers. We share in a lot of ways that you don't even know about. And we do that. Again, not proud. I'm just telling you what we're doing. We do that because we want to bless other people. We've helped other people get their place. We've helped other people get cars. We've helped other people get houses. We've helped people do it. Why? Because we chose in early stages of our marriage not to go into debt, not to have multiple streams of income. Pat never worked while we were having kids. She didn't have to because I worked my little butt off every weekend. 60 hours a week at the church. Why did we do that? Because we believed in the American dream. That if you put yourself in it and work it and put God first in it, you can be successful in life. You may not have what somebody else has. You may not have the house that somebody else has. You may not drive the car that somebody else has. You may not go on the vacation. But listen, where you are and what you have. But if you're sitting there, and this is where the sermon's going to just get up your butt a little bit. When you sit there and go, I wish I had what they had, or worse yet, I wish they didn't have what they had, you've missed love. Because love does not envy. Are y'all with me? Let me share with you in this closing moment how this occurs. Okay? Because some of you just don't get it. So what's that old saying that if you keep doing the same stupid thing over and over again, you know what I say? You're just stupid. Right? Just stupid. So I just decided a long time ago, I don't want to be stupid. I'm not very smart, but I don't want to be stupid. Okay? And if you're there today, I want to say two things to you in closing. I want to share a story to close, but I want to say this to you. If you need help getting relationally, financially, physically, mentally, spiritually, we will help you. That's what church is for. We are to help people get better at life, okay? So if you're sitting out there going, whoa, Ron, you're crossing some line. I've never heard this guy pray. I'm not a prosperity guy. I'm not that guy that says you give the church 10% of your money and God will bless you with a brand new, Mercedes. That's not me. I don't preach that. I preach work. I preach hard knocks. I preach doing things and failing, like Elon Musk, my little hero. Despite what you think about Elon Musk, here's what I think about. I listened to Elon Musk the other day. He said, what's the secret to success of Tesla and SpaceX? You know what he said? Failure. We fail all the time. But we do just enough to stay ahead of our failures and to succeed just a little bit more than we fail. That's the secret to success. Now, he didn't mention God or Jesus, so let me add the God or Jesus quotient. And here's my closing story. Little girl, 5 years old, had a daddy she loved with all of her heart. And he had given her at 4 a string of fake pearls. And she loved these pearls. She wore them all the time. She would take them off at night so she didn't mess them up, put them on her dresser. First thing after her bath in the morning, she put those pearls back on, fake pearls. She loved her pearls. She loved her daddy. One day her daddy went on a trip to the Orient and he came back and she ran to him and she was just so glad to be home and to have him home. And she said, Daddy, I love you so much. And he looked at her and he said, honey, how much do you love me? Oh, I love you with everything I've got. Well, if you love me with everything you've got, then give me your pearls. She thought for a moment. She went, I can't do that. That's okay, honey. She went on to bed, got up the next morning. It was on her mind. All through the day, it was on her mind. That night, she brought her pearls to her daddy and said, Daddy, I've been thinking about this all day. And I want you to know that I love you. And so here's my pearls that you asked for. The dad looked at her and he said, oh, I've got something for you then. He brought out a box. She unwrapped it, opened the box. And in that from the Orient was a fresh set of brand new real pearls. You see, until she surrendered what she had, she could not get what her daddy had for her. Do you understand that in the spiritual world? Let me just close with this. In the spiritual world, that's how it works. Until I surrendered my life to Jesus Christ, I was frustrated. I'd sit out in church just like you are, and I'd go, man, it's after 12 o'clock when this stinking preacher going to be done. All my friends are going to be at the Golden Corral before I get there. That's what I thought. My girlfriend's waiting for me. She went to another church. Hurry up. I didn't pay attention. Then one day I met Jesus at 18 years of age, and it was all over with. Oh, I still sat in church wondering why he wasn't done at 12 o'clock, but now I did it with joy. I listened. One day I decided that I was going to surrender my finances. And Pat and I, we had $50 to our name. I shared this with you last week. And when we got married and we started tithing, our first check we got. First check was for $200. That's how much we made each week, $200 a week, $10,000 a year. We thought we were rich. We had each other. We had, it's like Sonny and Cher. I got you, babe. I got you, babe. We don't need anything. I got you, babe. And we found out real quick we wanted more than each other. I like to eat more than those little fried Mrs. Paul's fish sticks. Remember those? That's what we had every stinking night because that's all we could afford. Mac and cheese. What do we have tonight? Mac and cheese. Mrs. Paul's fish sticks. I decided I'm going to surrender my money. And I started giving God 10%. And God began to bless. I decided one day I was going to give God Pat. And you all know Pat's everything to me. I mean, you don't mess with Pat, okay? She is Y'all think I think too much of her? I don't think enough of her. She's on a pedestal. She's on the highest rung of my ladder, okay? But one day God said, will you give me Pat? And I said, I already gave you my money, my career. I'm not going into politics. I got to be the stinking preacher of this church, and can't go to politics. I gave you everything. You want Pat? He goes, yeah, I want Pat. I said, no. 2 months later, she's in ICU. Doctor comes to me and says she's got a 40% chance to live. I got down on my knees in that ICU. They were trying to get me out, but I knew everybody that worked there, and I said, no, I ain't leaving. You can't stay overnight. I'll stay overnight. Y'all go to my church. I'm staying. All those nurses went to my church. I'm staying right here. I'm not leaving her side. And that night I gave my wife to Jesus. What are you holding back? What are you holding back? Person, finances, relationship, career. What are you holding back? Folks, until you give what is fake or less than the real to God, but the day you do, it's a whole new ball game. Would you stand with me for just a moment? Just with your eyes closed, if you're watching us online this morning, if you're able to do so, just stand wherever you are, as our people are doing in this building right now. And just in this quiet moment with your eyes closed, and as our prayer people come to the front, I want to take these last couple moments. And here's the question for you. Do you really, really love God? I mean, really love God. I'm not talking about being religious. I'm talking about, do you really love God? Love is patient. Love is kind. Love doesn't envy. Love surrenders. The key test that you really love God is that you surrendered your life to God. And if you've never done that, this is a great day for you to come this morning and say, I want to surrender my life to God. I want to receive Jesus into my life. I want him to change my life. I want him to come into my heart. I want to be more than religious. I want to be in relationship with God through Christ. And when you come to Christ, asking him into your life, asking him to become the forgiver of your sins and the leader of your life, God comes in and it's game over. Maybe that's a decision you need to make today, to surrender your fake spirituality and get the real thing, Jesus Christ. If that's you today, as our piano plays, I'm going to ask you to come and in just a moment and take one of these people by the hand and say, today I'm receiving Christ into my life. I want the real thing. There's some of you today that would say, you know, Ron, I'm already a Christian, but I've been holding back. I've been holding back my money, been holding back my time, been holding back a relationship. I've been holding back in my marriage. I've been holding back in my career. I've just been holding back. And God's saying to you today, only until you give it to me can I redeem it and give you the real thing. And maybe today you just need to step out and come and take one of these people by the hand and say today, would you pray for me? I need to surrender what I've been holding on to and give it to Jesus and get the good, the great, the better that he has for me. This morning, maybe that's something you need to do in your heart this morning, right now. You just come. Finally, there's some of you today that say, you know, Pastor Ron, I need to become part of this church. I've been sort of floating around, been checking churches out. I've been maybe coming here for a long time, maybe a short period of time, but maybe today you just need to say, you know, today I want to become part of what God's doing at First Baptist. We'd love to have you as part of the family. And this is an invitation for you to come. Just take one of these people by the hand. They'll help you fill out a short form. We would love to have you become part of what God is doing in this church. Right now, as people have come, as people are coming, what do you need to do? Surrender your life to Jesus? Surrender something in your life that you've been holding back from Jesus? Surrender becoming part of the family of Jesus? Right now, as quiet quiet moment. This quiet moment, you come. You come. You come. You come. Father, all across this building, watching online, God, help us just to surrender our fake pearls to the real thing, which is you. We pray in Jesus' name.